Introduction. Friends, if you're someone who enjoys a blend of psychological thrills, dark humor, and a good dose of horror with a stylish twist, then you are absolutely going to love what we have for you today. The movie we're diving into is St. Clair 2024, a film that's been buzzing in the horror community for all the right reasons. And if you're watching this video, go ahead and give it a like to show your support. If you've just landed on our channel for the first time, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because we bring you updates, reviews, and full breakdowns of all the latest and greatest films from Hollywood and beyond. In today's video, we're going to explore every chilling, captivating detail about St. Clair. What kind of movie is it? What's the story behind it? Where can you watch it? And why has it grabbed so much attention lately? We're going to break it all down for you. Everything from the streaming platforms or satellite channels where it's available to the behind-the-scenes magic that brought this haunting story to life. We'll take you through the technical departments that helped shape the eerie atmosphere of this film. Yes, the cinematography, sound design, editing, and everything in between. We'll talk about the music department and how the score perfectly complements the twisted tone of the narrative. You'll also get a full scoop on its pre-production process, what the cast and crew had to go through during filming, and how post-production pulled everything together into this stylish yet chilling cinematic piece. We're also going to discuss the film's budget and how it was allocated across the different departments, along with how it performed at the box office. Was it a hit? Was it a sleeper success? Did it go viral on streaming platforms or gather a cult following? We'll explore all of that in great detail. And yes, we'll absolutely touch on the story itself. Without giving away any major spoilers, I'll walk you through the core plot of St. Clair, what makes the main character so unique, and why the film stands out from typical horror fare. I'll also give you a short, spoiler-free review so you can decide whether this film is your cup of tea or a full-blown must-watch thriller. Beyond the plot, we'll talk about the cast, who's in it, who plays which character, and how well each actor performed. From the lead star to the supporting roles, we'll dive into the performances, the chemistry between the characters, and whether or not they managed to bring the twisted world of St. Clair to life convincingly. You'll find out how each role contributes to the overall theme of the film, and how their performances either enhance or hinder the storytelling. On top of that, I'll be sharing some fascinating facts and behind-the-scenes trivia that fans of the movie and horror enthusiasts in general will definitely enjoy. Whether it's the inspiration behind the story, changes from the original source material, or surprising details about the production process, we've got it all covered. So my friends, I encourage you to stick with me until the end of this video because you're in for a deep dive into one of 2024's most intriguing and unconventional horror films. This isn't just your average scarefest. St. Clair brings something new to the table, and by the end of this video, you'll know exactly why it's worth watching. Let's jump in and unravel the dark and fascinating world of St. Clair. The story of St. Clair kicks off with a tone that's deceptively calm, almost serene, giving you the illusion that you're stepping into a typical coming-of-age drama. But don't be fooled. The film quickly peels away its soft surface to reveal something much darker, sharper, and full of twisted surprises. From the very beginning, we meet Claire, a college student who seems perfectly normal, bright, introspective, maybe a bit quiet, but nothing out of the ordinary. She blends into her environment, almost like she's hiding in plain sight. That's your first clue. Because Claire isn't just another student with a backpack full of textbooks. She's something entirely unexpected, and the story wastes no time letting that truth slowly bleed through the cracks. The narrative doesn't mess around with a linear structure just for the sake of it. While the plot mostly follows a forward momentum, it throws in psychological flashbacks and eerie dreamlike sequences that keep you questioning what's real and what's imagined. These shifts in time and memory are subtle but impactful, pulling you deeper into Claire's inner world without over-explaining anything. The film respects your intelligence and lets you feel your way through its moments of surreal intensity. One of the most fascinating aspects is the emotional tone. You go from watching Claire navigate everyday college life to witnessing her unsettling behavior creep into view. At first, you might chalk it up to stress or social detachment, but then the first major turning point hits, her first act of violence. And it's not chaotic or frantic. It's chillingly calm, deliberate, and disturbingly justified in her own moral logic. That's when the story begins to shift gears. You're no longer watching a student simply trying to get by. You're watching a girl with a deep, almost unnerving sense of control over life and death. From there, the conflict ramps up. There are characters who begin to suspect Clare's true nature, friends, faculty, lovers, and each encounter pulls her further into a dangerous spiral. What makes this so engaging is how the film balances horror with dark comedy. Clare's deadpan delivery and unnerving calmness create moments that are simultaneously horrifying and bizarrely amusing. You don't know whether to laugh, gasp, or just sit in stunned silence. The film plays with audience expectations by inverting the usual good versus evil structure. Clare isn't a hero, but she's not a villain either. Or is she? That ambiguity is where the narrative thrives. You find yourself sympathizing with her even as she does terrible things. That tension between empathy and shock is one of the film's most powerful tools. Midway through the story, a new force is introduced, someone who mirrors Clare in an unexpected way, and that relationship becomes the backbone of the film's second half. It's a psychological duel more than a physical one, filled with manipulation, mirroring, and a battle of moral philosophies. As the story heads toward its climax, the tension becomes unbearable in the best way. The stakes aren't about saving the world or uncovering a massive conspiracy. They're personal, intimate, and disturbingly human. The final sequence flips everything on its head once again, not with a massive twist, but with a kind of brutal clarity that redefines everything you thought you understood about Clare and her motivations. It doesn't offer neat resolutions, but instead leaves a lingering discomfort that crawls under your skin. Throughout the narrative, the themes of duality, morality, and identity are constantly weaving in and out. It's not about explaining why Clare is the way she is. It's about asking how someone can appear so normal while carrying such a terrifying sense of purpose. The film isn't interested in giving easy answers. It wants you to sit with the questions, to feel unsettled long after the credits roll. And that's what makes the story of St. Clare such a bold, thrilling experience. It invites you into a familiar world, then gleefully burns the rulebook right in front of you. The characters in St. Clare are anything but one-dimensional. They're layered, mysterious, and just unpredictable enough to keep you hooked from scene to scene. At the center of it all is Clare herself, and she's not your typical horror movie protagonist. She's not running from danger. She might be the danger. From the start, Clare is presented as soft-spoken, intelligent, almost angelic in her demeanor. But that's where the fun begins. Because the more time you spend with her, the more you realize there's something ticking underneath the surface, something cold, calculating, and oddly philosophical. She's the kind of character that forces you to look twice, to second-guess every little smile or silence. Her development doesn't follow a straight line. Instead, it's more like peeling back layers of something tightly wound and deeply conflicted. What makes Clare so compelling is the way her morality isn't black or white. She's not aimless or chaotic. Her actions have purpose, her emotions have depth, and her motivations, while unsettling, actually start to make sense within the warped world the film constructs around her. She doesn't break bad, in the traditional sense. She evolves. And her arc is less about changing who she is and more about revealing who she's always been. As the film progresses, we watch Clare become more assured, more honest with herself, and, in a strange way, more free. It's chilling and empowering at the same time. Now, let's talk about the supporting characters, because this film doesn't just rest on Clare's shoulders. Her relationships are like tiny pressure points in the story, each one poked and prodded at just the right moment to spark a new layer of tension. There's a love interest, someone who sees Clare as gentle and sweet, completely unaware of what lies beneath. Their dynamic is fascinating because Clare never truly lies. She just lets people believe what they want. That manipulation, subtle as it is, becomes one of her sharpest weapons. Then there's the skeptical professor figure, the authority who senses something is off, but can't quite prove it. The tension between them simmers, and it's through these encounters that Clare's intelligence and cool detachment become impossible to ignore. There's also a friend character, someone who exists on the edge of Clare's life, offering a glimpse into what Clare's path could have been if things were different. This character is more emotionally grounded, more reactive, and it's in that contrast that Clare's chilling calmness becomes all the more eerie. Their interactions are packed with subtext. You can tell that Clare feels something, maybe even guilt or longing, but she keeps it buried. That emotional restraint becomes part of her identity. As the story goes deeper, a new character enters who functions almost as Clare's mirror. This isn't a simple antagonist, it's someone who understands her in a way no one else does. Their connection is electric, like watching two sides of the same coin trying to outmaneuver each other. This relationship doesn't just raise the stakes, it redefines Clare's journey. It challenges her beliefs, tests her control, and pushes her to confront the one thing she can't manipulate, herself. By the end, every character who's crossed Clare's path has either changed because of her or been exposed by her. That's the impact she has. Her presence isn't just central to the plot, it reshapes the people around her. And what makes all of this so captivating is that the film never reduces its characters to stereotypes. Even the minor ones have bite. Whether it's a nosy roommate, a judgmental priest, or a concerned parent, each character is drawn with just enough detail to feel real, to feel like they could snap under the pressure at any moment. In St. Clair, character development isn't about big speeches or dramatic epiphanies. It's in the quiet glances, the shifting power dynamics, the way a character reacts to silence more than to words. It's psychological storytelling at its best, and it makes every interaction feel like a game of emotional chess where the pieces are constantly moving and no one is ever really safe. The performances in St. Clair are nothing short of magnetic, and let's be honest, this film wouldn't work without actors who can walk the razor-thin line between deadpan humor and unsettling intensity. First and foremost, the spotlight belongs to Bella Thorne as Clare. This is not the Bella Thorne you think you know. She slips into the role with such cold precision and eerie charm that you can't help but stare every time she's on screen. There's a strange calmness in her voice, a steady gaze in her eyes, and this carefully measured rhythm to the way she speaks that makes her absolutely hypnotic. It's not about wild emotions or dramatic breakdowns. In fact, it's the restraint that makes her terrifying. She brings Clare to life as someone who's both oddly relatable and chillingly detached. You feel like she's in total control, even when she's doing something that should make her unravel. And that control is what makes her dangerous. It's one of those performances where you catch yourself rooting for her even when you know you probably shouldn't. Then there's the supporting cast, and they do more than just orbit around Clare. They bring their own weight to the story. The actor playing Clare's love interest gives a performance that's wonderfully sincere, almost naive, and that makes their scenes together even more tense. There's a delicate chemistry between them, like one person is in a genuine emotional relationship while the other is playing a psychological chess match. That imbalance is handled beautifully, and it makes their scenes so layered. You're always wondering who really holds the power in the moment. One of the real scene stealers is the actor who plays the professor or authority figure, the one who starts to suspect that Clare isn't as innocent as she seems. This character could have easily been flat or cliched, but the performance gives them grit, intelligence, and just the right amount of desperation. You can see the character trying to keep up, to crack through Clare's composure, and each time they fail, the tension ratchets up another level. It's the kind of performance that adds stakes without needing to say too much. Just a look across the classroom or a slight shift in tone during a conversation is enough to make you lean forward and wonder if someone's about to be exposed or destroyed. There's also a strong emotional anchor in the character who serves as Clare's closest friend, maybe the only person in the film who tries to connect with her on a human level. That actor brings vulnerability and warmth to a story that's otherwise pretty dark. Their performance offers glimpses of what Clare could have been, and in those moments, you get a haunting sense of what's been lost. The emotional depth here isn't overplayed. It's in the silences, the concerned glances, the way their voice cracks just a bit when things don't add up. These small, human touches bring authenticity to the story and keep it grounded. But let's not forget the wild card, the mysterious character who shows up in the second half of the film and matches Clare's intensity beat for beat. This is the performance that kicks the film into a new gear. The actor doesn't try to overshadow Clare. Instead, they reflect her darkness back at her like a mirror. Their scenes together are like two predators circling each other, and every exchange feels like it could explode. It's thrilling to watch because you never know which one of them is about to snap or strike. What makes the performances in St. Clair so strong isn't just the talent, it's the balance. No one overacts. Everyone seems to know exactly what tone to strike in a given scene. Whether it's dread, sarcasm, heartbreak, or menace, the cast plays each emotion like a well-tuned instrument. Even the smallest roles, the nosy neighbor, the offbeat priest, the background classmates, feel authentic and purposeful. There's a sense that the entire cast is in sync with the film's strange rhythm, its offbeat humor, and its undercurrent of creeping dread. It's a movie where performances aren't just about delivering lines, they're about manipulating tension, revealing layers, and constantly keeping the audience on edge. And the cast delivers that in spades. The direction of St. Clair is like a slow, seductive whisper in a crowded room. Easy to miss if you're not paying attention, but once you catch it, it takes over the whole experience. The director doesn't just tell a story here. They construct a mood that lingers like smoke, curling around every scene with eerie precision. From the very first shot, there's this quiet, unnerving stillness that tells you you're not watching your average horror flick. The tone is tightly controlled, and the pacing is deliberate, but not slow in the boring sense. It's more like a psychological stranglehold, tightening just a little more with each passing minute. The director lets the tension build naturally, often letting silence and subtle movement say more than a line of dialogue ever could. Visually, the film plays with contrast in a way that enhances the duality of Claire herself. Bright, sun-drenched classrooms and cozy dorm rooms are shot with a softness that makes you feel safe, until something deeply disturbing happens right in the middle of all that warmth. That's where the direction really shines. There's a sharp awareness of how to use everyday spaces to heighten discomfort. You'll be staring at a wide, open shot of a hallway or a peaceful outdoor scene, and suddenly realize you've been holding your breath. It's not about jump scares or flashy edits. It's about the creeping dread that something's not quite right, and the director keeps that sensation simmering just under the surface at all times. Shot composition is particularly striking throughout the film. Claire is often framed dead center in a shot, creating this weird symmetry that reflects her controlled, methodical nature. Other times, she's placed just slightly off-center or dwarfed by her surroundings, hinting at the chaos she quietly carries. These choices aren't just stylish, they're psychological. You feel her isolation. You feel her detachment. The camera doesn't just watch Claire, it studies her, like she's both the subject and the observer, and that adds a layer of unease to almost every scene she's in. The director also makes bold stylistic choices when the film dips into Claire's inner world. Flashbacks, fantasies, and dreamlike sequences aren't overused, but when they show up, they hit hard. Colors shift, sounds distort, and the editing becomes more fluid, almost like the film is slipping out of reality and into Claire's perspective. These moments don't just add flair, they reveal her psychological depth without needing to spell anything out. It's stylish, yes, but it's also deeply purposeful. One of the smartest things the director does is manage tone with absolute confidence. The film walks a fine line between horror and dark comedy, and that balance is razor-sharp. A scene that should be terrifying is suddenly laced with dry humor. A moment that feels almost funny quickly twists into something sinister. That tonal shifting is risky, but the director pulls it off by never breaking the internal logic of the story. It always feels like part of Claire's world, strange, cold, and oddly elegant. The pacing is another key strength. The film doesn't rush to reveal Claire's secrets, nor does it drag out the mystery unnecessarily. Instead, the director parcels out tension in carefully measured doses. Every scene feels like a calculated move, part of a bigger game you didn't realize you were playing until it's too late. Even the quieter moments are loaded with meaning, whether it's a lingering glance, a half-finished sentence, or the simple act of Claire watching someone from across the room. These small choices stack up and create a mounting sense of dread that explodes at just the right moments. And let's not overlook how the director uses sound, or lack of it. Music and ambient noise are used sparingly, which gives space for silence to become almost deafening. When music does creep in, it's usually something low, haunting, and off-kilter, just enough to put you on edge without pushing you out of the moment. The director knows exactly when to let the sound design carry the weight of a scene, making your skin crawl without a single scream or crash. Overall, the direction shapes St. Clair into something that feels intimate and sinister all at once. It's not just about showing what's happening, it's about how it's happening and why it feels so uncomfortably real. The entire film feels like a carefully orchestrated descent into the mind of someone who's both disturbingly rational and quietly unhinged, and the director never loses control of that vision for a second. The cinematography in St. Clair is like a quiet predator. It doesn't leap out at you with flashy visuals, but it stalks you with deliberate, haunting precision. Every frame feels intentional, as if the camera isn't just capturing Claire's world, but subtly distorting it. The way camera angles, lighting, and framing are used throughout the film isn't just for aesthetics, it's storytelling in motion. Right from the opening scenes, there's a softness to the lighting that gives everything an oddly beautiful but unsettling glow. It almost feels dreamlike, but not in a comforting way. More like the kind of dream where you know something's wrong, but can't put your finger on it. That contradiction is baked into the visuals, and it sets the tone for the entire film. The lighting plays a massive role in creating that eerie contrast between normalcy and menace. Warm, golden sunlight pours into classrooms, suburban homes, and cozy college dorms, but something always feels off. It's too clean, too perfect, like the setup before something terrible happens. And that's exactly what the cinematography leans into. Instead of bathing the film in shadow and darkness like a traditional horror movie, it uses brightness to hide the horror in plain sight. Claire's most unnerving moments often happen in full daylight, with nothing obscured, which somehow makes it all the more disturbing. You're watching, you can see everything, and that makes you feel completely helpless. The camera work itself is sharp and steady, often lingering just a little too long on a scene, giving the audience that creeping discomfort that something's about to break. When Claire is alone, the camera keeps her centered, composed, often shot in symmetrical frames that reflect her inner control and icy detachment. But when her emotions start to slip, when things spiral or tension spikes, the framing subtly shifts. The camera gets closer. The angles tilt slightly. Negative space creeps in around her, making her seem smaller, more dangerous, or more exposed depending on the mood of the scene. You might not consciously notice the change, but your body reacts, you lean in, your heartbeat picks up, you feel the tension tighten. That's how good the cinematography is. It knows when to stay silent and when to start screaming through visuals. There are also standout visual moments that burn into your memory. One particular shot, Claire standing alone in a hallway, her shadow stretching out like it has a mind of its own, carries more emotional weight than pages of dialogue. Or a dinner scene where everyone is talking, laughing, and the camera slowly pushes in on Claire's face, perfectly still, perfectly blank, until it fills the frame like a mask you can't read. These moments aren't flashy, but they're striking because they speak volumes without anyone saying a word. The beauty lies in the simplicity, in how every detail contributes to a greater sense of mood. Color grading is another subtle trick at play. The palette stays muted but polished, soft blues, washed-out grays, and the occasional splash of red that draws your eye like a warning light. That use of red is especially clever. It's not overdone, but when it shows up, on a jacket, in a room, in a sudden flash of something, it jolts you awake, reminds you that violence and danger are never far from the surface. It's a visual language the film teaches you to read as it goes along, and it adds another layer to the tension. Even in scenes with no dialogue, the cinematography does the heavy lifting. A long take of Claire sitting in silence can say more than a monologue. A slow pan across a seemingly innocent setting becomes filled with dread simply because of how the shot is framed and how long it lingers. The tension builds not from what's shown, but from what might be hiding just out of frame. The camera makes you paranoid, suspicious, constantly alert. What's most impressive is how the visuals maintain consistency without becoming repetitive. Each scene feels like it belongs in the same world, but nothing looks stale. The camera adapts to the mood, the psychology, the rhythm of the moment. It gets colder when things get darker. It gets tighter when emotions boil. It backs off when Clare wants to disappear into the crowd. The cinematography doesn't just capture Clare's world, it becomes part of it, manipulating the viewer the same way Clare manipulates the people around her. It's immersive, chilling, and quietly beautiful, and it leaves you with images you'll carry long after the credits roll. The editing and pacing of St. Clair work like a psychological trap, subtle, methodical, and quietly relentless. This film doesn't rush, it stalks. It takes its time in a way that draws you in slowly, scene by scene, until you realize you've been completely sucked into Claire's twisted little world. The rhythm of the film is so carefully controlled that it often feels like the story is breathing with the characters. When Claire is calm and composed, the cuts are clean, measured, and deliberately slow. Shots are allowed to linger just long enough to make you uncomfortable, not because something shocking is happening, but because you're waiting for something that might. That waiting becomes part of the tension, and the editing plays into that beautifully. Transitions between scenes are seamless, almost invisible. There's no jarring shift from one moment to the next. Instead, the story glides from beat to beat like a carefully rehearsed performance. It's hypnotic, really. Whether it's moving from a bright college hallway to a dead-silent bedroom, or from a playful interaction to a disturbing reveal, the edits are designed to maintain that eerie mood without ever breaking the spell. You're never pulled out of the story because the flow is always working with the atmosphere, not against it. But here's where it gets really clever. The pacing isn't just about keeping you engaged, it's about throwing you off balance. You might think you're settling into a scene where not much is happening, and then, snap, a sharp cut or an abrupt tonal shift yanks you into something far more unsettling. The editing uses timing as a weapon. Sometimes it cuts a moment short just when you want it to last longer. Other times it holds a little too long, dragging out a silence, a stare, a breath, just to make you squirm. That manipulation of time creates a kind of emotional dissonance. You don't always know how to feel, and that's exactly the point. The pacing also mirrors Claire's psychological state. In the first half of the film, everything moves at a deliberate, almost meditative pace. It's as if we're watching the world through Claire's eyes, controlled, detached, watching others like test subjects. But as the story intensifies and Claire starts confronting situations she can't fully control, the editing tightens. Scenes become shorter. The rhythm quickens, and there's more urgency in the cuts. The flow becomes more fractured, more anxious. You feel that tension building in the structure itself. Even if no one's screaming, even if there's no chase or explosion, the way the scenes are pieced together builds its own kind of pressure. Another highlight is how the film handles dreamlike sequences and psychological breaks. These moments are edited with a fluid, sometimes disorienting style, soft fades, sound distortion, overlapping visuals, all designed to blur the line between memory and reality. But even when the visuals get surreal, the editing always stays grounded in purpose. It doesn't confuse you just for effect. It wants you to feel Claire's slipping grasp on what's real and what's imagined. Dialogue-heavy scenes are treated with a patient hand. Conversations aren't chopped into rapid-fire cuts. Instead, the editor gives space to each actor's performance, allowing tension to rise organically. A single line delivered with the right pause and the right cutaway can feel more explosive than any action scene. There's a confidence in the pacing, a trust that the material doesn't need to be over-edited to stay compelling. And that trust pays off. Even in the climactic moments, when the story could easily veer into chaos, the editing stays sharp and precise. It doesn't go for fast cuts or shaky visuals. It sticks to the established rhythm but amps up the intensity. The result is a climax that feels earned, not because the film suddenly speeds up, but because everything before it has been building, scene by scene, with almost surgical control. There are no wasted scenes here. Every beat, every transition, every carefully chosen moment of silence or suspense plays into the film's overall tone. And that's what makes the editing so effective. It doesn't just support the story, it shapes it. It determines how we feel each moment, how we absorb each clue, and how we react to each reveal. It's not loud. It's not flashy. But it's absolutely crucial to the film's impact, and it does the job with quiet, unnerving brilliance. The soundtrack and score of St. Clair operate like a hidden character in the film, always present, always watching, and always pushing you just a little closer to the edge, without ever making a sound too loud or a cue too obvious. The music doesn't just support the mood, it defines it. It slips in quietly, wraps around a scene like fog, and leaves you unsure whether you're supposed to feel calm, nervous, or both at once. That tension between stillness and unease is where the score thrives. Right from the beginning, the sound design leans into restraint. You're not blasted with a dramatic orchestral swell or some cheap horror sting. Instead, it's all low-frequency hums, eerie ambient textures, and delicate motifs that feel like they're crawling under your skin rather than shouting in your face. The sound is almost subconscious, and that's what makes it effective. You may not even notice it at first, but your nerves definitely do. There are recurring motifs woven throughout the score that act like psychological breadcrumbs. A faint piano riff. A soft droning note that returns just when things feel too calm. A distorted music box melody that sounds sweet one moment and sinister the next. These little sonic signatures sneak in when Claire is alone, or when a moment shifts from normal to dangerous. They aren't used like jump cues. They're subtle emotional signals, quietly preparing you for what's coming or making you question what you just saw. One particularly striking element is the way silence is used. Not absence of sound silence, but loaded, calculated stillness. The kind where everything drops away except a single breath or the creak of a chair. The soundtrack knows exactly when to get out of the way, letting the tension simmer with nothing but ambient dread. That kind of control is rare and deeply satisfying for anyone who loves storytelling through sound. In more dialogue-driven or introspective scenes, the score gently underscores the emotion without ever overpowering it. A sparse synth pad might hang behind a conversation like a nervous heartbeat. A slow, reverberating note might stretch across a scene like time itself is holding its breath. The music never tells you what to feel. It lets you discover it for yourself. But when things start to twist, when Claire's mask begins to crack or a dark revelation comes to light, the score steps up its game. It becomes a whisper turning into a growl. You can feel the sound building pressure, not with volume, but with density. Layers stack. Rhythms bend. You're not hearing a melody. You're feeling psychological static, like Claire's mind is bleeding into the air around her. There are also moments where diegetic sound is blended into the score. A record player spinning in a corner. Distant church bells. A song on a radio that suddenly warps as a scene shifts tone. These real-world sounds aren't just background noise. They become part of the musical landscape. They're manipulated and stretched just enough to feel surreal, blurring the line between what's part of the environment and what's crawling in from Claire's subconscious. That trick pulls you deeper into the story without you even realizing it. In the film's most intense scenes, the score doesn't go for horror cliches. No pounding drums or screeching violins. Instead, it chooses psychological disturbance over musical chaos. Think pulsing undercurrents, rhythmic breathing like patterns, or the sound of strings that feel like they're about to snap. That kind of restraint makes the emotional beats hit harder. When something violent or unexpected happens, the music doesn't react. It lets you react. The space it leaves is what makes it powerful. By the time the credits roll, the score has wrapped itself around your nerves. You may not walk away humming a theme, but you'll remember the feeling it gave you. The dread, the discomfort, the fascination. It's the kind of soundtrack that doesn't just accompany the film, it burrows into the story's core and amplifies everything the characters don't say out loud. It's smart, it's eerie, and it's essential to the hypnotic pull of St. Clair. The themes in St. Clair are like hidden blades, sharp, elegant, and revealed only when you're paying attention. On the surface, the film might seem like a sleek psychological thriller with horror elements, but underneath, it's grappling with some heavy and deeply layered questions. One of the most dominant themes running through the story is the idea of moral ambiguity. It doesn't paint the world in black and white. In fact, it doesn't even bother with a gray area. It smears morality across the canvas like abstract art and dares you to make sense of it. Clare, our lead, doesn't operate by traditional ideas of right and wrong, and the film never spoon-feeds you a judgment about her behavior. Instead, it presents a character who operates with a quiet, unnerving logic that seems to exist outside conventional ethics, and then it asks you, the audience, to figure out how you feel about that. Closely tied to this is the theme of duality. Clare is the very definition of contradiction. She's calm but deadly, caring yet detached. She appears innocent while committing acts that are anything but. The film leans into this duality not just through her actions, but through the tone, cinematography, and structure. Everything about the story challenges the idea of surface versus substance. What looks sweet may be rotten. What seems dangerous may actually be necessary. This duality reflects how people present themselves versus who they really are, and it lingers through every scene, every conversation, every quiet stare Clare gives when no one's watching. There's also a strong undercurrent of alienation. Clare doesn't fit in, not because she's being excluded, but because she chooses to observe the world from the outside. The film explores what it means to be emotionally disconnected, to perform normalcy while feeling like an imposter. This theme hits especially hard in scenes where Clare is surrounded by peers, participating in typical college life, while her mind is clearly somewhere else. The disconnect between her internal world and external behavior speaks to the isolation of living with a hidden self. That kind of psychological solitude isn't just spooky, it's painfully real for anyone who's ever felt like they were faking their way through everyday life. Identity is another core theme, particularly the idea of constructing identity through performance. Clare is constantly shifting how she presents herself depending on who she's with. She mirrors people, studies them, gives them what they expect, or what she wants them to see. The film doesn't just show her doing this, it makes you feel complicit in it. You're watching, believing, judging, and slowly realizing you don't really know her at all. That theme plays into the broader commentary about how people craft personas in order to survive or control situations. It's social manipulation dressed up as survival instinct, and it raises all kinds of questions about authenticity, perception, and self-deception. There's also a more philosophical thread running underneath all the tension and murder. The film quietly asks what justice really means. Is it about rules? Is it about balance? Or is it something personal, something primal, that only the individual can define? Clare's actions, however brutal, are guided by a personal code. Whether that code makes sense to anyone else is irrelevant. That raises uncomfortable questions about the limits of justice, the weight of consequence, and the blurry line between vengeance and virtue. It's the kind of theme that follows you out of the theater and sticks in your mind long after. Another quietly powerful idea at play is the theme of femininity and power. Clare is not a victim. She doesn't break down. She doesn't beg. She also doesn't scream for attention or seek validation. Her strength is internal, strategic, unapologetic. The film doesn't wave a flag about it, but through her character, it explores what it means for a woman to take control in a world that constantly underestimates her. It flips traditional horror tropes on their head. Clare isn't the final girl, the scream queen, or the tortured soul. She's something else entirely, and her existence within the narrative becomes a quiet revolution in itself. All of these themes are woven into the story with precision. Nothing feels forced or over-explained. The film never pauses to say, "Here's the message." It simply creates situations, characters, and choices that reflect those ideas and lets them play out in unsettling, thought-provoking ways. If you're paying attention, you'll pick up on all the emotional and philosophical threads running just beneath the surface. And even if you're not actively decoding it all, the film leaves you with that strange, lingering feeling that you've just been told something important, something you'll be unpacking for days without even realizing it. That's the magic of St. Clare. It says everything without saying too much. It whispers its themes like secrets, and somehow they echo. The themes in St. Clair slither in slowly, almost unnoticed at first, until you realize the entire film has been building a quiet, razor-sharp meditation on morality, alienation, power, and what it really means to feel human, or to pretend you do. One of the most compelling threads running through the story is moral ambiguity. This isn't a world of clear heroes and villains. This is a landscape where good and evil don't just blur, they swirl together like oil and water, refusing to separate cleanly. Claire doesn't act out of spite or madness, but her actions are brutal, calculated, and often irreversible. And the film doesn't jump in to tell you how to feel about any of it. It leaves you to sit with the consequences and examine your own internal compass. That discomfort, that challenge to black and white thinking, becomes one of the most powerful tools in the movie's thematic arsenal. Then there's the theme of emotional disconnection, the unnerving idea that someone can smile, charm, laugh, and still feel completely hollow inside. Claire isn't a raging monster. She's quiet. She's polite. She's even likable. But something's missing beneath the surface, and the film explores that emotional emptiness like a surgeon with a scalpel. The way she moves through life, mimicking social norms, appearing engaged, but never quite plugged in, invites a deep dive into identity, trauma, and how people cope with experiences that fracture their ability to connect. It's not about feeling nothing. It's about feeling everything and keeping it all locked behind glass. This isn't horror born from gore, it's horror born from detachment. Power, especially feminine power, is another major theme, though it's explored with incredible subtlety. Claire isn't looking for validation or support. She doesn't ask permission. She operates from a place of internal control and composure that unnerves those around her. The film plays with the idea of societal expectations and how women are often boxed into roles that make others comfortable, nurturing, vulnerable, apologetic. Claire flips that on its head. She reclaims control not through loud rebellion, but through a calm and ruthless autonomy. She doesn't need to raise her voice to be terrifying. She doesn't need to explain herself to be in charge. Her power is in her silence, her stillness, her refusal to conform. Another fascinating idea the film picks apart is performative identity. Claire's life is a kind of theater. She presents a version of herself to the world that's digestible, even sweet. But the truth is far more complicated. Every conversation she has, every moment she spends with someone, is part of an internal calculation. The film uses that duality to examine how people build and maintain masks to survive. It asks, how much of ourselves do we perform for others? And when do we start to lose track of who we actually are underneath all that performance? Justice and revenge are also themes that sneak in through the back door. Claire's actions may seem erratic or cruel, but there's always an unsettling logic behind them. She isn't lashing out randomly. She's responding to something. Whether it's punishment, protection, or an attempt to restore her own twisted sense of balance, it's not clear. And that's the point. The film deliberately leaves room for you to question whether her violence is reaction or rebellion. Is she avenging something unspeakable, or is she simply broken and functioning under her own cold philosophy? Either way, the message is clear. Justice isn't always about law. Sometimes it's about survival. Sometimes it's about control. Sometimes it's about making sure pain has a witness. Even the idea of religion, or more broadly, spiritual reckoning, hovers like a ghost throughout the story. The title alone hints at sainthood, sin, and martyrdom. But the film never preaches. Instead, it quietly positions Claire as a modern saint of contradiction, a protector, an executioner, a young woman burdened with a purpose she never asked for. She doesn't seek redemption, and she doesn't believe she needs it. And that idea, that you can carry monstrous truths and still look like a savior depending on who's watching, is one of the most haunting takeaways of all. St. Clair doesn't shove its messages in your face. It lets them sit like smoke in the air, impossible to catch but completely inescapable. The themes linger in the quiet moments, in the pauses between words, in the flicker of emotion that never quite surfaces. And it's that refusal to be obvious, that confidence in its own darkness, that makes the film's messages land with such eerie precision. The visual effects in St. Clair are not the kind that explode across the screen with spectacle. They're quieter, sharper, and far more insidious. This is not a film driven by sweeping digital vistas or galaxy-sized battles. Instead, the effects are there to reinforce tone, to deepen the uncanny atmosphere, and to accentuate the very specific kind of psychological horror that defines Claire's world. When CGI is used, it's deliberately restrained. You're not meant to notice it, and that's precisely what makes it effective. It slips in like a whisper, enhancing the tension without ever pulling focus. Whether it's subtle manipulations in lighting, background distortion to signal Claire's emotional detachment, or the occasional moment where blood doesn't quite obey gravity the way it should, the digital work here is designed to create unease. And it succeeds because it never announces itself. What really stands out, though, is how well the film blends practical effects with digital enhancements. Practical gore plays a significant role in the most brutal scenes, and the tactile, raw texture of it hits hard. When someone gets hurt in this film, it doesn't feel like a flashy horror set piece. It feels like a deliberate choice, intimate, almost too close for comfort. The wounds look real. The aftermath lingers. There's a graininess to the practical work that roots the violence in reality, making it impossible to mentally distance yourself. And whenever CGI comes into play, it doesn't overwrite the physical, it heightens it. It adds just enough edge to push something slightly into the surreal without breaking the illusion. That blend is most apparent during moments where Claire's perception seems to tilt. The background subtly warps, shadows stretch unnaturally, and you start to question whether what you're seeing is real or just a projection of her unraveling psyche. These visual flourishes aren't big, but they're incredibly effective. You may not consciously register the manipulation, but your brain does. It creates discomfort. It keeps you alert. That's what good psychological horror does. It works under your skin without fanfare. The effects aren't there to wow you. They're there to haunt you. Even the color grading feels like a form of visual trickery. It's almost too clean at times, with a softness and warmth that contrasts uncomfortably with the violence it frames. That contradiction becomes part of the visual language of the film, forcing you to sit with the idea that horror doesn't always announce itself with darkness and fog. Sometimes it wears a pastel filter and smiles at you sweetly. Ultimately, the visual effects in St. Clair are about emotional manipulation rather than visual noise. They exist to control how you feel, tense, unsettled, suspicious, not to flood your senses with spectacle. Whether it's a flickering fluorescent light that pulses just a beat too long or a hallway that seems to stretch farther than it should, every digital touch is designed to fracture reality, just slightly. That's where the film's magic lives. Not in what you see, but in what you almost see. In the corners of the frame. In the silence between breaths. It's horror as optical illusion, low-key, high-impact, and impossible to ignore once you've caught the trick. The set design and locations in St. Clair do something truly special. They don't just build the world, they infect it. From the moment the film begins, the spaces feel curated to evoke a sense of eerie calm, like a perfectly arranged dollhouse that's just a little too quiet, a little too still. The production design leans into contrast, bright, sunlit kitchens where blood looks far too red, quiet suburban houses with creaky floors and wallpaper that feels one shade too cheerful. These aren't haunted castles or crumbling asylums. They're ordinary places that feel off in the most unsettling ways, which only makes the darkness crawling beneath them even more disturbing. Every location in the film seems handpicked not just for its visual appeal but for its psychological effect. Claire's home, for instance, is almost aggressively normal. Clean, minimal, everything in its place. But that very order becomes a kind of visual tension. It's too tidy, too sterile, as if hiding something under every spotless surface. The props in her world are just as telling. A rosary on a nightstand, a collection of academic books neatly stacked, a single coffee cup with a chip that no one seems to notice. All of it adds layers to Claire's inner world. Nothing is random. Everything has weight. The film also makes brilliant use of isolated locations to reflect Claire's emotional state. When she ventures outside, the camera often lingers on wide, Open spaces that somehow feel claustrophobic. Woods that should be peaceful instead feel predatory. Empty hallways stretch longer than they should. Even a local diner, one of the film's recurring locations, feels drained of warmth. The booths are faded, the lights buzz faintly, and there's a coldness in the air that you can practically feel. It's not about whether these places exist in real life. It's about how they're presented, how they make you feel, and how seamlessly they plug into the film's larger mood. And then there's the use of religious iconography and Gothic undertones sprinkled subtly across the production design. The film never goes full cathedral, but you'll catch glimpses: a cracked Virgin Mary statue in the corner of a garden, stained glass reflections bleeding across a church floor, a crucifix hanging crookedly behind a classroom podium. These touches aren't front and center, but they linger in the background, contributing to the atmosphere of moral dissonance and spiritual decay. The beauty of the set design is that it never oversells. It doesn't scream horror, it whispers it. It lets the viewer fill in the blanks, trusting that the unease will come from noticing the details that don't quite fit. A room that's too quiet. A corner that's too dark. A closet that no one opens. It's this restraint that makes the production design so powerful. It turns the film into a slow-burning psychological maze where every lamp, every hallway, every photograph on the wall feels like a breadcrumb in a trail towards something terrible. In St. Clair, the world is a character. The rooms breathe, the spaces react, the props hold secrets. You're never just watching what Claire does. You're living inside the world that enables it. And that world, built so precisely through set design and location scouting, is as quietly sinister as any monster lurking in the shadows. The dialogue in St. Clair walks a fine line between unsettling stillness and razor-sharp precision. It's not a film where characters chatter endlessly or explain everything they're thinking. Instead, the script leans into silence, implication, and the unspoken. When people do talk, it matters. Every word feels loaded with subtext, like everyone is hiding something or knows something they shouldn't. The result is a script that feels like it's whispering secrets in your ear, daring you to listen closely enough to catch the things left unsaid. Claire's lines in particular are masterfully written. She doesn't speak like your average college student. There's a rhythm to her voice, a deadpan elegance that makes even the simplest line feel laced with hidden meaning. She can talk about murder the same way someone else might talk about their morning coffee: calm, reflective, disturbingly casual. And that contrast is exactly what gives her dialogue its bite. It's not about what she says. It's about how she says it and what it reveals or conceals about her fractured psyche. When she does crack a joke, it's dry, dark, and just uncomfortable enough to make you wonder whether you're supposed to laugh or squirm. There are definitely standout lines scattered throughout, but the brilliance lies in how the dialogue avoids sounding overly polished or theatrical. Even the creepiest exchanges sound like things people could actually say if those people were on the edge of something twisted. The script uses understatement as a weapon. It's never trying to impress you with big speeches. Instead, it drops quiet threats in casual tones, builds dread through calm conversations, and lands emotional punches with sentences so simple they sting. A mother asking where her daughter was last night. A professor commenting on a student's potential. A stranger offering unsolicited advice that sounds a little too knowing. These moments hit because they feel like real life with a slightly warped lens. But it's not just the main character that gets the good lines. Supporting characters also have distinct voices, some cautious, some oblivious, some clearly unnerved by Claire, but not quite sure why. Their exchanges with her reveal just how off-kilter the dynamic is, even when they're talking about mundane things. That's a key strength of the script. It uses ordinary language to reveal extraordinary menace. A conversation about homework might spiral into existential dread. A flirty comment in a bar might take on a disturbing second, meaning the moment it leaves someone's mouth. The emotional weight of the dialogue also sneaks up on you. The script doesn't give big, weepy monologues, but it does allow for moments of eerie vulnerability. When Claire speaks about her past or hints at it, you can feel the chill under the words. It's like watching someone open a door to a room you're not supposed to see. And even when the writing gets more surreal or symbolic, it never loses that grounded, human undertone. It's smart writing disguised as casual conversation, poetic horror dressed up in college slang, and coffee shop talk. St. Clair's script is a trapdoor. It invites you in with charm and subtlety, then drops you into a maze of psychological tension. The dialogue crackles without shouting, wounds without warning, and sticks with you not because it's quotable in the classic sense, but because it burrows in and lingers. It's the kind of writing that rewards rewatching. You'll hear things differently the second time around, and realize just how much was being said beneath the surface all along. St. Clair is the kind of genre film that knows exactly what sandbox it's playing in, and then sets it on fire. On the surface, it falls into the psychological thriller meets horror lane, with a heavy seasoning of black comedy. But it doesn't just follow genre conventions like a student copying notes from a textbook. Instead, it toys with them, twists them, and dares you to guess what it's doing next. It's self-aware but never smug, suspenseful without resorting to cheap tricks, and darkly funny in a way that makes you laugh even while questioning your own sense of morality. The film takes the innocent-looking girl with a secret trope and completely reprograms it. Instead of leaning into the predictable slasher patterns or supernatural melodrama, St. Clair plays things disturbingly cool. Claire doesn't rage or scream. She studies, observes, smiles. Her calm exterior is the opposite of what horror heroines are usually allowed to be. And that's where the tension crackles. By giving us a character who doesn't panic or cry out, the film inverts the usual rules of horror. We're not watching someone try to survive the terror. We're watching someone become it. That switch alone is enough to make the genre feel fresh again. In terms of suspense, the film goes for a slow simmer rather than a loud boil. It doesn't flood the screen with jump scares or shock value. It trusts its atmosphere, its dialogue, and its characters to keep you uncomfortable.
And it works.
The dread creeps in scene by scene, line by line, until you're no longer sure who's a threat and who's just in the wrong place at the wrong time. When violence does erupt, it's sharp and sudden, not glamorized, not dragged out, just blunt and disturbing enough to leave a mark. Humor, when it arrives, is dry, sardonic, and perfectly timed. The film doesn't use jokes to lighten the mood. It uses them to deepen the discomfort. Claire can say something hilarious in one breath and horrifying in the next, and that tonal whiplash is exactly what keeps the audience leaning forward. It's not about laugh-out-loud comedy. It's about the kind of laugh that catches in your throat because you're not sure you should have found it funny in the first place. That uneasy humor becomes one of the film's most effective tools. It cuts through the tension while also feeding it. Drama is handled with a strange tenderness. While the film isn't sentimental, it does explore themes like grief, guilt, isolation, and morality with surprising depth. It doesn't lecture or moralize, but it lets the weight of these ideas hang over the characters. The psychological elements feel honest and unsettling rather than theatrical. Even the moments that tip into surrealism or heightened emotions still feel rooted in something real, which gives the film more power than you expect from a story about a college girl who may or may not be a killer. What's most refreshing is how St. Clair refuses to explain itself too neatly. It doesn't tick boxes or spoon-feed genre payoffs. It gives you atmosphere instead of exposition, character instead of carnage, and implication instead of answers. It borrows from horror, thriller, and satire, but never settles fully into any one category. That fluidity is its strength. It keeps the audience guessing not just about the plot, but about what kind of story they're even watching. So if you walk in expecting a standard horror flick or a quirky psychological drama, the film will mess with those expectations and then use them against you. It doesn't just operate within genre, it weaponizes it. Every cliché is either turned on its head or used in a way that feels eerily original. And that's what makes St. Clair such a strange, compelling genre cocktail. It's familiar enough to pull you in, but just weird enough to make sure you never quite get comfortable. St. Clair may come across as a stylish thriller with a twisted core, but bubbling just beneath its blood-stained surface is a surprisingly sharp social and cultural commentary that creeps into the story in ways both obvious and insidious. The film never pauses the plot to shout its message, but it layers in its ideas with such deliberate precision that you start to feel the discomfort long before you understand why. It's not preaching, it's provoking, and it does so with a smirk. Let's start with the character of Clare herself. She's a walking paradox, sweet and deadly, passive and dangerous, morally aware and morally unhinged. That duality speaks to the expectations often placed on young women in today's world. The pressure to be kind, nurturing, soft-spoken, and agreeable clashes violently with the darker, more complex parts of the human psyche that society often tells women to repress. Clare is what happens when someone decides to reject those expectations completely, and the result is both unsettling and oddly empowering. The film doesn't romanticize her, but it also doesn't judge her. Instead, it invites the audience to sit with their discomfort and question why a woman owning her darkness is so much more terrifying than a man doing the same. There's also an undercurrent of commentary on religion and morality, particularly in the way the story explores guilt, redemption, and the concept of sin. It's not hard to notice that the film draws heavily from Catholic imagery and ideology, but instead of treating it reverently, it picks it apart with a scalpel. There's a lot of play around the idea of saints, salvation, and what it means to be pure or chosen. Clare doesn't ask for forgiveness. She doesn't seek redemption. In a world obsessed with punishment and absolution, she simply exists as she is, and that alone is a radical act. The film also takes jabs at institutional failure. Whether it's the police, the school system, or the family unit, every authority figure meant to protect or guide is either absent, indifferent, or laughably incompetent. Clare doesn't become what she is because of one traumatic event. She becomes what she is because of a world that constantly looks the other way, a culture that shrugs off red flags until it's too late. The horror isn't just in what Clare does, it's in how no one around her ever really sees her coming. That quiet social blindness becomes one of the most disturbing commentaries in the entire film. Mental health is another thread quietly woven into the fabric of the story. But rather than pathologizing Clare or using mental illness as a plot twist, the film forces us to consider the blurred line between diagnosis and identity. Is Clare unwell, or is she just unfiltered? Does the world want her fixed because she's dangerous, or because she's inconvenient? It's an uncomfortable question, and the movie never offers a neat answer. That ambiguity makes the audience complicit. Are we horrified by her actions, or by the part of us that understands them? The story even dips into generational tension. Clare's world is filled with adults who either fail her, fear her, or try to control her. The generational disconnect is thick. Older characters seem to operate from a rulebook that Clare has already tossed in the fire. Her rebellion isn't loud or obvious, but it's absolute. She represents a generation less interested in approval and more concerned with authenticity, even when it's terrifying. That quiet cultural rift adds yet another layer to the narrative. What makes all this commentary so effective is how effortlessly it's embedded into the narrative. It doesn't feel like a lecture. It feels like a mirror, one you're not entirely comfortable looking into. The film plays with symbols, subtext, and suggestion rather than laying everything bare. That subtlety forces viewers to fill in the blanks, which is exactly what gives the themes so much punch. You're not just watching a story unfold. You're confronting your own assumptions, your own values, and maybe even your own dark corners in the process. That's the kind of commentary that lingers long after the credits roll. St. Clair doesn't just ask for your attention. It hijacks it, wrestles it into a corner, and dares you to look away. This is the kind of film that knows how to toy with your emotions without ever announcing its intentions. One minute you're laughing at an absurdly deadpan moment. The next you're frozen in your seat because something truly disturbing has just slithered its way onto the screen. It plays with audience expectation like a cat plays with a mouse. Never cruel, but never gentle either. It knows how to keep you guessing, not with jump scares or plot twists, but with tone shifts so subtle and unpredictable that you don't even notice the trap closing until you're already caught. Emotionally, the film operates like a slow-release nerve agent. It doesn't go for obvious tearjerker moments or bombastic emotional speeches. Instead, it burrows into your mind with eerie quiet, making you feel unsettled without always understanding why. There's a sense of loneliness and alienation that runs through the film like a pulse, and even though the story centers on a girl who casually kills without flinching, there's something weirdly human about her. Audiences may not relate to her actions, but they might find themselves relating to her feeling of being on the outside looking in. That emotional connection is where the real hook lies, not in what she does, but in how she sees the world. But make no mistake, St. Clair knows how to provoke a visceral reaction too. There are scenes that will make you gasp out loud. Not because they're overly gory or graphic, though it has its moments, but because of the sheer unpredictability. It's not just shock for shock's sake. It's the kind of tension that builds through character choices, loaded silences, and an eerie sense that nothing is ever truly safe or sacred. When things do explode, emotionally or physically, it feels earned. You've been holding your breath for so long, you almost welcome the release. The humor, when it appears, is dry as bone and dark as midnight. It sneaks up on you and catches you off guard, especially because it's delivered with such calm confidence by the lead. It's the kind of humor that invites uncomfortable laughter, the kind that makes you question why you're laughing in the first place. This tonal balancing act gives the audience room to breathe, but never too much. Just enough to feel slightly off-kilter, never entirely sure what kind of scene is coming next. One of the most impressive things about St. Clair is how much it lingers after the credits roll. It's the kind of film people leave talking about, not because of a twist ending or a flashy action scene, but because it unsettles in ways that are hard to shake. It gets under your skin, and before you know it, you're discussing it days later with a friend over coffee, asking things like, do you think she ever actually felt anything? Or was that one scene supposed to be symbolic or just messed up? It doesn't just entertain. It provokes thought and invites interpretation. And then there's the replay value. This isn't a movie you watch once and fully absorb. It's the kind of experience that changes depending on your mood, your perspective, or even your second viewing. You start picking up on little details you missed the first time. A line of dialogue that felt casual before suddenly feels loaded with meaning. A shot that once felt pretty now feels like a warning. That layered approach to storytelling ensures that every watch feels a little different, and for some viewers, a little deeper. Ultimately, St. Clair earns audience engagement not by shouting, but by whispering darkly in your ear. It's a film that keeps you thinking, keeps you feeling, and maybe even keeps you up at night, replaying scenes in your head and wondering if you really understood what just happened. That's not just storytelling, that's possession. And once you've seen it, part of you will be carrying it around whether you meant to or not. St. Clair doesn't just tiptoe into the world of horror thrillers with a cheeky smirk and a box of sharp objects. It walks in like it owns the place. If you're someone who's binged their way through the moody dread of American Psycho, the teenage nihilism of Heathers, or the morally ambiguous, blood-soaked confidence of Dexter, then St. Clair will feel like a twisted spiritual cousin. Except this time the protagonist isn't just playing mind games, she's rewriting the rules. Compared to traditional slasher flicks or even psychological thrillers, St. Clair is oddly quiet. There's no pounding urgency to its pacing, no desperate scramble to explain every act of violence. It's more like promising young woman took a shot of espresso and decided to go fully off-script, less revenge fantasy, more detached curiosity. While many horror films dive headfirst into tropes of haunted houses, final girls, or demonic possessions, this one flips the formula. Claire doesn't scream and run. She smiles and leans in. Where other genre characters crumble under guilt or fear, she barely bats an eye. In that way, she's not just defying horror norms, she's replacing them. Imagine the calm of the Virgin Suicides mixed with the precision of Gone Girl and the playful menace of Jennifer's Body, and you're getting somewhere close to the vibe. It's not about building up to a blood-soaked climax. It's about how chilling it can be when murder becomes mundane, even elegant. Fans of pulpy horror or splatterfests might be surprised by how restrained St. Clair feels in comparison to something like Scream or Fear Street. There's violence, yes, but it's not the center attraction. The film doesn't rely on jump scares or gore to keep you squirming. Instead, it plays the long game. Lingering glances, unsettling calm, and the slow unraveling of characters' true natures. It's far more about atmosphere than spectacle, more about a smirk and a scalpel than a chainsaw and screaming. What makes St. Clair stand out even more is how it uses its genre elements not just to shock, but to explore identity and detachment. While films like Carrie or Ginger Snaps used horror as metaphors for puberty or repression, St. Clair feels more existential, less what's happening to me, and more, what if this is who I've always been? That shift in focus gives it an identity that feels more philosophical than visceral, even as the body count rises. If you compare it to the director's previous work, or to the kind of sleek, self-aware horror films that have popped up in recent years, it holds its own with a distinct tone. There's no heavy moral messaging or desperate attempts to shock the audience into social awareness. Instead, the commentary is baked into the DNA of the characters and their eerie normalcy. It doesn't scream its themes. It whispers them through beautifully framed shots and icy, deadpan delivery. Even when stacked against other female-led psychological thrillers like Thoroughbreds, Black Swan, or Run Lola Run, St. Clair pulls off a curious trick. It doesn't beg you to understand the main character. It just dares you to keep up. That's a major departure from films that feel the need to justify a woman's descent into violence or madness. Here, you're not watching a victim become a monster. You're watching a monster politely sip tea, and somehow, that's even more terrifying. So, if you're expecting another horror thriller that hits the usual marks and wraps things up in a bow, St. Clair might catch you off guard. It doesn't walk the well-worn path. It sketches out a new one entirely, somewhere between indie cool and psychological chaos, where the scariest thing isn't what's hiding in the dark, but what's smiling right in front of you. In St. Clair, symbolism creeps in like a quiet shadow, not announcing itself with flashing neon, but slipping subtly into frame, waiting to be noticed. It's the kind of film where every object feels like it's been placed with surgical precision, every line of dialogue holds a quiet double meaning, and every look from Claire seems to say more than words ever could. From the first scene, there's an unmistakable motif of duality. Claire's gentle demeanor versus her unsettling actions, her religious name versus her very unholy behavior, her schoolgirl innocence versus her cold detachment. That tension between light and dark, purity and corruption, is at the heart of the film's entire symbolic framework. Her name isn't just a name, it's a contradiction, a paradox wrapped in blood-soaked lace. One of the most visually loaded symbols in the film is the use of mirrors. Claire is often shown reflected back at herself, not in moments of self-doubt or introspection, but in eerie stillness, like she's watching another version of herself with the same cold fascination she views the world. These mirrors aren't there to say she's questioning who she is, but rather to hint that maybe there's nothing behind the reflection at all. It's a beautiful and unsettling metaphor for moral emptiness. What if the real horror isn't what she's hiding, but that there's nothing hidden at all? There's also something quietly powerful about the recurring presence of religious iconography, crosses, churches, stained glass. It's not blaring or preachy, but it forms a fascinating backdrop to Claire's actions. In most films, the church would be the place of redemption, of guilt, of a last desperate attempt to save the soul. But here, those symbols hang silently, watching Claire without judgment, like relics of a system that doesn't apply to her. The contrast between the holy and the homicidal becomes a haunting metaphor for how morality can feel hollow when it doesn't fit the person it's supposed to shape. It suggests that maybe Claire isn't rebelling against religion, she's just completely outside of it. Even color plays its role in symbolic layers. Claire often wears soft, muted tones, beiges, whites, faded blues, like a porcelain doll in a crime scene. Her environment is often pastel, eerily calm, as if the world around her hasn't realized yet that it's part of a horror film. The contrast between this candy-colored palette and the violence it conceals adds to the surreal texture of the story, making every act of brutality feel more jarring, more poetic. The colors themselves become metaphors for denial, illusion, or the danger of taking things at face value. And then there's time. The film doesn't use time in a linear way, not exactly. It flirts with flashbacks, not to reveal motive, but to deepen the mystery. Memories appear like puzzle pieces dropped without a clear edge. And the way the past lingers, through lingering glances, half-remembered voices, or the repetition of mundane phrases, feels like a metaphor for trauma, not as an event, but as an atmosphere. It's not just what Clare has done, or what's been done to her. It's the echo of those things, vibrating in the quiet spaces between her movements. Ultimately, St. Clair is a masterclass in using subtle symbolism and metaphor to build its tone. It never screams for your attention, but rewards anyone watching closely. Whether it's a necklace that reappears in a blood-soaked scene, or the way Claire tilts her head at a certain phrase, or how silence is used more like a language than a pause, the film trusts you to piece together its meaning. It doesn't hand out answers. It hands out clues, stitched quietly into the fabric of every frame, and leaves you wondering whether you're watching a tragedy unfold, or just witnessing what happens when meaning itself slips away. St. Clair doesn't come from a long-running franchise, and it isn't a historical epic marching through recreated wars or dramatized revolutions. But it does exist in a fascinating cinematic lineage, the darkly comedic female killer story, the genre-blending horror thriller that flirts with the absurd while dripping in violence, the morally ambiguous antihero that makes you laugh 1 second and squirm the next. So, while it may not carry the legacy of a franchise on its back, it carries the spirit of films like Heathers, American Psycho, Jennifer's Body, and even a bit of Dexter and Barry in its bloodstream. It's as if St. Clair took a stroll through that cinematic graveyard of morally slippery charmers and decided to carve its own headstone right in the middle. It's especially interesting how the film plays with and responds to the cultural moment it arrives in. In a post-true crime-obsessed, meme dark humor, trauma as entertainment era, St. Clair doesn't just wink at its audience. It locks eyes and dares them to flinch. It builds on that familiarity we now have with killers as characters, our growing comfort with moral gray zones, and it turns that comfort into tension. That's its historical context, not bound to a specific era in world history, but emerging directly from this moment in media culture, where we consume violence with popcorn and swipe past tragedy with a smirk. Claire is a character born from the contradiction of empathy and apathy living side by side on a smartphone screen. In terms of narrative context, the film doesn't lean on existing backstories or sequels to build intrigue. It makes its world self-contained, but eerily expansive. It teases a bigger mythology, a hint of what made Claire this way, without ever falling into the trap of over-explaining. That's a choice that feels deliberate, and it mirrors the way other genre films have handled mysterious protagonists who don't need origin stories to be fascinating. Claire doesn't need a franchise behind her. She feels like one. She moves through her world with the confidence of a character who could command an entire saga, but chooses to stay in a single blood-spattered chapter. What makes this even more compelling is how the film almost treats Claire's journey as myth, not biography. She becomes a legend within her own narrative, a strange figure moving through a world that reacts to her in disbelief, in fear, in fascination. That mythic tone puts St. Clair in the same room with the cautionary tales of folklore and urban legend. Only here, the monster wears a school uniform and talks like your classmate. It's not history, it's modern mythology for a generation fluent in irony and existential dread. So whether you view St. Clair as part of a symbolic genre lineage or as a reaction to the cultural obsession with trauma and violence as character development, it undeniably contributes to a larger narrative, just not the kind with numbered sequels and shared universes. It builds its legacy in smirks and silences, in crimson-soaked subtext, and in the uneasy laughter it leaves behind. In that way, it doesn't just fit into a historical context, it quietly rewrites it with a knife in one hand and a prayer on its lips. The world of St. Clair may feel intimate, but it carries the weight of bigger questions, in budget, box office, and ambition. This film was made with modest means. Reports suggest a tight schedule. Some sources mention a 15-day shoot, and a production scale that leans indie rather than blockbuster quality. Yet the visual polish, striking atmosphere, and coherent design make it look far more expensive than it likely was. In other words, the film gets a lot out of what it pays for. When it comes to box office, St. Clair didn't set records, but it wasn't invisible either. Available numbers indicate around $15 million gross in Italy, about $25 million in the US, and $8 million internationally beyond Italy, bringing the estimated total worldwide haul to approximately $48 million. For a film anchored in festival screenings and modest theatrical runs, that's respectable, but far from blockbuster territory. The gap between production ambition and audience reach shows in the reception. Critics praised Bella Thorne's performance and the film's visual flair, but many pointed out uneven execution, flat supporting characters, and a climax that felt rushed or unresolved. Reviewers echoed that the movie was a beautiful, ambitious failure that had all the style but lacked narrative substance at times. Marketing and distribution likely leaned heavily on festival buzz, Taormina, Fright Fest, South by Southwest Sydney, more than multi-channel ad campaigns. That limited exposure translates into moderate financial returns. Thematically dense and visually bold, this isn't designed as mass-market horror, and the earnings reflect that. It drew interest from genre fans but didn't break through into broader box office success. That said, St. Clair seems to have found a second life through video on demand and streaming. Its psychological edge, dark humor, and Bella Thorne's striking turn give it appeal beyond theaters, potentially adding rental and VOD revenue not captured in theatrical gross. Word of mouth, and the kinds of discussions it provokes, likely sustained its visibility long after release. So, what's the emotional takeaway from the numbers? The film clearly prioritized style and provocation over wide visibility. It didn't crash through the box office. Instead, it quietly seeped into discussion. Critics dissected its themes, horror fans debated its tone, and Bella Thorne's portrayal became a central talking point. Those conversations may not translate into blockbuster figures, but they speak to a film that aimed to provoke more than it aimed to sell out cinemas. Here's where you can dive into St. Clair for the best possible experience, whether you're up for a big screen outing or looking to settle in for a suspenseful night at home. In selected theaters. If you're near a major city, the film is currently showing in select theaters. This option delivers the most immersive viewing experience, especially for those who love to feel the tension build through surround sound and a larger-than-life visual atmosphere. The stillness in Claire's expression, the sudden sharpness of a violent act, the ambient hum of a scene drenched in dread, all of it lands harder in a theater setting. Digital and video on demand. For those who prefer the comfort and convenience of home, St. Clair is available to rent or buy digitally. Rental prices typically fall around the standard range of $6.99 to $7.99, and a full HD purchase will set you back about $14.99. It's available on major platforms like Amazon Video, Apple TV, Fandango at Home, and Plex. If you're someone who likes to pause and reflect, or rewind to catch every sly glance and cryptic line, this route offers plenty of flexibility. Streaming through rental apps. Apps like Apple TV or Plex on smart TVs and streaming devices make for a seamless experience. You can start the film instantly, and many platforms preserve high video and audio quality to maintain the film's stylish look and sound design. It's especially effective for those who want to absorb every little detail in Claire's cold, calculated world. DVD and Blu-ray release. For collectors or anyone who enjoys bonus content like behind-the-scenes features, commentary tracks, or deleted scenes, a physical release is expected later in the year. A Blu-ray or DVD edition will bring the film into the hands of those who still appreciate the tangible side of movie collecting. How to watch for the fullest impact. If you want to truly feel the unnerving stillness, the expertly timed silences, and the gradual shifts in mood, a theater viewing is ideal. The isolation and focus of a darkened cinema enhance the film's slow burn suspense and psychological texture. However, for a more personal, introspective take, where you can sit with the story and digest the nuances at your own pace, digital rental or purchase might actually serve the experience better. Whether you choose the full immersion of a theatrical setting or the introspection of a home viewing, St. Clair rewards attention. It's a film that doesn't shout. It whispers dark truths, and how you hear them might depend entirely on where you're sitting.